All right, welcome everyone. I call to order the General Plan Mixed Use Ad Hoc Committee for June 29th, and it is 5:01 p.m. Over to you, Recording Secretary Salmana Shah.
Thank you. Assembly Bill 361 suspends certain provisions of the Brown Act, allowing public meetings like this one to be held via teleconference to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. I will now conduct roll call, after which I will ask the chair to recognize me in order to confirm certain matters for the record. Mayor Hudson. I'll wait for him to unmute before I move on.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Marks.
Here.
Commissioner Wallace.
I'm here.
Council Member Zafar.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, will I recognize you again?
Okay. Based on the responses to roll call, the record should reflect that all committee members can hear the proceedings clearly. If there are no objections, the record will further reflect that each committee member believes, based on voice or facial recognition or otherwise, that the persons presenting themselves to be committee members are in fact committee members. So if there's any objection, let me know.
Not at all.
Okay. Seeing no objection, I will turn the meeting back over to Council Member Zafar with the reminder that all votes must be taken by roll call. Thank you.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
before we get started, I'd like to make a statement for the record since we've been doing that since we got on here.
You're a little faint.
Am I faint?
You're
Now-
lucky, Eric. I was gonna wait till you were through to tell you.
Then you'd have to listen to it again. So although our recording secretary has made a statement at the beginning of this meeting, like she has in all the others, about the Brown Act, the fact is that this meeting is not subject to the Brown Act. Now, we've chosen to conduct the meeting as if it were, but I want to put on the record that this meeting is not subject to the terms of the Brown Act.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, we continue on to item 2 then. Continued business mixed-use land use policies and standards. Staff report by Cindy Yee, Senior Planner. Over to you, Cindy.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It'll just take me a minute here for that to register. Okay. So hopefully you're able to see this presentation here. So this afternoon, we're here just to provide just an update on things that we've been working on since our last ad hoc meeting on May 31st. On May 31st, we started our discussion on mixed use land use policies and standards. And then we had a City Council and Planning Commission public hearing on the housing element update, where we also received a presentation on floor area ratio and density examples. And then on June 22nd, we had an Economic Development Advisory Committee meeting where we received a report on the retail analysis and economic policies. And so this afternoon, I thought it would be beneficial to provide a summary of the retail analysis, just a really high level overview. This committee had made a request at the last ad hoc meeting to obtain a copy of the retail analysis, and was hoping to be able to see that in order to provide more, engaging comments on the mixed use discussion. And so our consultant will be providing a presentation in July to the Planning Commission, but I'll go ahead and just provide a brief overview of the analysis, and then we can certainly discuss some specifics, or if you have questions, I can always provide those to our consultants so that they are prepared at the next Planning Commission meeting where we're discussing this item, that they can have some prepared responses to that. So as you saw in the staff report, the retail analysis is prepared by a consultant who is using 2019 as the base year for their data. And they chose to use 2019 really to avoid distortions in that might be associated with short-term impacts of the pandemic. And so it's a comparison of to the 2017 urban economics retail study that was last prepared for the city. And so in the study, you'll see some comparisons to the changes that have been made to the market and San Ramon's retail outlook in general. So in comparison to the 2017 analysis, you'll see that there's a demand for growth in these four land use sectors. There is a potential for the increase in additional square footage in retail, office, industrial uses, and then hotel uses. As noted in this slide, the city already has two hotel projects that have been approved. They are not under construction, but we've made some gains since the 2017 study was completed, and recognizing that there's some additional room for growth through 2040. And so when we look at how much has changed since the 2017 study, what we see is that the retail inventory has grown about 400,000 square feet, an increase that's largely attributed to the development of the city center project in 2018. We're also seeing that rent growth has slightly outpaced inflation. So the asking rate for rents continues to increase and outpaces inflation. The retail vacancy rate has increased from 2.8% to 5.5%, and again, largely due to the impacts of the pandemic. In total, San Ramon's is seeing an increase in our resident retail demand. The capture rate has increased from what was 65% in the 2017 study to now 71%, meaning that we're seeing less retail demand leakage than we were seeing 5 years ago. And so again, in large part due to some of that, the additional retail tenants that have come in since the construction of the city center project. And then in comparison to the 2017 study, there's now a projection that the city can support a stronger potential growth in supportable retail square footage. We're looking at a range between 800,000 to 1.4 million square feet of potential growth that could be supported in the retail sector. And so the new retail space targets there are different retail categories. General retail, that would include general merchandise, apparel, furniture, and others. That's the one type of retail category. There's a food and beverage retail category, food service and drinking, hardware, building materials, and then automotive parts. And so you'll see on this chart here that there is supportable ability to grow in these retail categories, and you'll see the low and the high scenario in this chart of retail supportable retail space. The report also has some highlights of the city's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And so it highlighted that Saramone's strengths is our resident income and education levels are high. We have a large and diverse employment base, and we have stronger than expected population growth. And that continues to grow despite the pandemic. Our weaknesses are our location. We're in between other strong retail markets, Walnut Creek and Dublin to the south. The area that's adjacent to the freeway west of 680. There's not a lot of retail land designations on the west side of 680. So that does put us at a disadvantage. And in general, our land uses and the type of land that's available within our urban growth boundary is limited. We do have opportunities for repurposing underperforming centers and building on the success of City Center and just kind of building that momentum that has grown since 2018. But there are continued threats to that growth. There are global changes in retail. We've talked a lot in the past about e-commerce and the impact of that on local retail sales, and then a potential loss of sales tax base as impacts from the pandemic continue to affect the retail climate. You do see changes that are happening, continue to be attributed to the pandemic. So the analysis recommends that the city look at some policies in our economic element and our land use element, and look at tools and policies that could incentivize reinvestment in existing retail properties in order to maintain the retail footprint. Also investing in a retail tenant recruitment and marketing campaign to continue to retain the tenants that are in the city, as well as to market and try to attract additional tenants to Saramone. And then just continue Saramone's comprehensive approach to economic development, recognizing the potential value of promoting mixed-use villages. And so while we may not necessarily have one centralized location, like a strong downtown, that we have opportunities for villages in Saramone. Saramone Village specific plan does have a strong network of commercial properties, as well as the North Camino Ramon specific plan area. And we have these priority development areas that can be recharacterized as villages, where the homes that are surrounding those neighborhoods can support some of the retail that we envision could be enhanced in those neighborhoods. So those are the recommendations of the analysis, and what we'll be looking at when we're preparing our economic element update, as well as when we prepare the mixed use land use standards that will seek to find that balance of new land uses in the mixed use and development in that mixed use, but how do we retain the retail and incentivize reinvestment in those centers. So with that in mind, our goal is at your next July meeting to bring suggested land use policies and standards based on the analysis recommendations, and then continue to bring that forward to the larger planning commission and city council bodies for their input as we update our draft general plan. So that concludes my presentation this afternoon. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, but I'm open to any questions that you might have if you want to ask those now, or I do know we do have some people in the audience who would like to provide comments as well.
So do we want to start with public comment first and then come back and do our discussion? I would recommend we take public comment, Commissioner Marks, if that's okay with you, and then we come back and do our questions and discussion.
That's fine. I simply had a clarifying question, but I can wait.
Right. So I think let's go to public comment.
Sure. So we have call-in user 1 as the first speaker. I didn't allow them to speak. And then we have where you can speak for up to 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, if this meeting is not mandated by the Brown Act, then hopefully we can go back and forth on questions and answers, and we don't need to be subject to 3-minute limitation. Because since the presentation is a repeat of the past presentations of different meetings, after the public has listened to this particular presentation, we're still at a loss. We don't know if you are trying to take away the retail spaces and put in more affordable housing, or you're trying to figure out where are the obsolete and unused spaces. I think neither the agenda nor the presentation has really addressed what this meeting is about, and there is no recommendation documented on the agenda. Obviously, if it's not mandated by Brown Act, we don't have to be, I guess things become sloppy. So I'm not sure what this is about, and if you guys can clarify it without the dogs barking in the back. Also, of course, not mandated by the Brown Act, people can chat behind and we can hear people murmuring. This is just not very professional at all. So since we are tax-paying residents, I would really like to know, if this is not governed by the Brown Act, which rule are you going by? And if there is more information that come up, the public has questions, I will again hit *9 and I hope to be called. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Jim Blickenstaff.
Hello, committee. Jim Blickenstaff with Camp Ad. First of all, I'm going to focus on the risk to the marketplace retail and some of the issues that are going on at this point. Marketplace, it has been a viable community serving center, retail center, grocery center for decades. And it looks to be even more so in the future with the impact of the population growth. So we have to pay special attention to the uniqueness and specialness of this location, how it serves primarily San Ramon rather than people getting in on and off the freeways. But the city has incorrectly stated that SB 330 eliminates subjective judgment. And as such, it does not allow for project adjustment based on opinion, personal preference, or community desire. That is inaccurate. And it taken at face value, it limits what the city can do. So the update of 330 was done legally in September, and it says, even with standards that are not objective, they call it a HAA, does not bar local agencies from imposing conditions of approval. Rather, it prohibits conditions that the project develop at a lower density unless health and safety is at risk. Local governments are not barred from imposing conditions that do not reduce in density. So there's a lot of discretion there that city officials should be aware of. That's part of the decision-making process. I believe, and I've seen documents for this, city has a mandatory duty and responsibility to apply its ordinances and general plan to the fullest extent possible that do not preempt 330. That includes looking at HOS sites that are currently proposed by staff to be on 3 sides of the marketplace retail. And that constricts the opportunities there. And it's premature to designate HOS sites surrounding Nob Hill when you don't even have a study that demonstrates what you need to make viable mixed use in that site, because this will constrict the mixed use potential. It will especially constrict it when one of the 3 sides, the south side, actually eliminates where Nob Hill was. It demolishes Nob Hill and eliminates that location, which has been a viable location for 30 some years. So let's be very careful how we apply some of these rules and how they can backfire on us with a community serving location like Marketplace. I think Marketplace is in need of a master plan. The city ordinances allow for that. And then we can understand how we make it viable and keep it viable, mixed use retail grocery that's only going to grow with the needs of thousands of more people moving into that area and continue to make it community serving as a priority. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. Do you have anyone else?
We do have a few others. Before I continue, I just wanted to mention that we did receive one late communication item from Susan Ferris Intercom, and that was provided to the committee members prior to the meeting.
Yeah, we got that.
So I'll go ahead. The next person in line is Ariel Strauss.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. My name is Ariel Strauss, attorney at Green Fire Law in Berkeley, representing CampAd. And I thank you for holding these meetings. It's very important we have such a responsive forum to dive into the details of these issues around mixed use. And would support also a more flexible way of running this type of meeting specifically. I want to say that we appreciate this important forum. Now, the retail analysis is spot on. And the executive summary directly warns that the limited supply of developable land is, quote, the single greatest constraint on future retail development in the city. And also, quote, warns as older centers become less competitive, the city is likely to face increasing pressure to redevelop these properties with residential development, as already reflected in the city's draft 2023 to 2031 housing element. So I want to highlight that I hope what we're trying to do here is use these mixed use design guidelines and criteria to protect those extremely valuable and essential sites and enhance them so that they become competitive relative to the surrounding areas, and not only reduce what is identified here as the leakage problem, which we should also recognize as a vehicle miles traveled problem, a VMT problem that increases traffic and pollution, greenhouse gas impacts that have to be evaluated in the CEQA, but also brings in sources of revenue from surrounding areas and fully meets the local community need. And as Jim Blickenstaff pointed out, the retail analysis actually undercounts the amount of retail storage square footage that is at risk here, because particularly with respect to the TRC site that is being proposed to develop at Marketplace, it does not consider that that supermarket has currently closed, and the TRC proposal proposes adding 40 condos in place of over 40,000 square feet of retail space, which is just a very poor trade. And I also wish to point out that one issue we're facing here is that the positive developments post 2018 are primarily driven by what I must assume to be for projects in the pipeline before 2018, which means they weren't applied for under the constraints of SB 330. So it's very important that we think very carefully about how we tinker with this process. and recognize that right now the general plan has a very good process and for considering which sites are mixed use, and has a very strong, robust, and helpful mixed use ordinance that should be respected and maintained to the greatest extent possible in the face of SB 330, and that the city should not increase the unit density allowed or identify sites as housing opportunity sites when they in fact are prime mixed use sites. And I think the TRC application right now is essentially a case study of what can happen if the city is not careful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are all the hands. Doesn't look like we have any other speakers.
All right. So
Oh,
if we
actually,
do.
we just got another hand, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Susan Ferris, Intercom.
Thank you for acknowledging that you did receive my written response. I appreciate that very much. And I would hope that folks have a chance to read that, because it's a much more in-depth analysis of the individual stores and other appendices that were added on there. And I just want to make sure that that gets communicated to the consultant that is performing the analysis work, et cetera, because I think it's really, really critical that that section be current and be accurate for every single shopping center, especially those that have had housing opportunity sites assigned to them. And I do think the yes, no could be improved with the numbers as I listed, because I think that's really important in decision making when you start to break apart retail in the particular shopping centers. So if that needs, if my written documentation needs to be communicated to others within the general plan staff, I would appreciate that happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, was that it?
Yes, that's it.
All right, then we can close public comment. And we can start the discussion amongst ourselves. I do want to set a tone for what the discussion is here today, because last year, the city council during our retreat decided that retail was going to be a priority for us. And the reason we formed the ad hoc committee between the commissioners and the council members is because we want to make sure that as we have to meet our RENA numbers and our growth numbers, we balance the retail and the housing. So we're all here to make sure that we build a community that everybody lives in, thrives in, and enjoys. And we've seen the leakage. You know, we are looking at the budget and everything as well. So that's why we're all paying attention. We're all listening to what everybody said, and we want to make sure that the planning process and the general plan that we will be submitting for this year has a good balance. And that's why we have the subcommittee of the council and the commission. So just wanted to make sure we kind of set the tone. And I know Commissioner Marks had his hand raised before we went to public comment. So why don't we start off with you?
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. The reason I had my hand raised was to ask a clarifying question about both the staff presentation and the staff report. If you look on page 2 of the staff report, there is a table at the bottom of the page, and it has 3 columns. And the first row is retail. If you go over to the 3rd column, the range of retail demand is 1.1 million square feet to 1.8. In the actual report, it said 800,000 square feet to, I think it was 1.4. So I'm wondering what's the change all about?
Yeah. So it has to do with the projected year. So the general plan update goes to 2040. But in order to do an apples to apples comparison of the 2017 economic study, because that study looked at supportable retail square footage through 2035. There was an adjustment made to the upper end of the range to adjust for that 5 years of difference. So even though 2040 has an upper range of 1.8 million, as a comparison to the 2035 study, that range drops to 1.4.
Okay. The second clarifying question I have is on page 3 of the staff report, where again there is a table, and under retail category there is food and beverage, and right below it food service and drinking. And so I just would like to know, what is the difference between food and beverage and food service and drinking?
So food and beverage would be the retail sales of food and beverage, like a grocery store or a market, corner market. Food service and drinking is specifically like restaurants or food service.
That makes sense. Madam Chair, those are my clarifying questions, and I'm happy to wait my turn to make any comments that I've got.
So looks like Mayor Hudson has.
Yeah, we had some comments made by the attendees, and I want to be clear about it. We're trying to do a couple things here. One for sure is we got to submit a general plan within the next couple months. And I don't know how you're going to get a master plan done before you have to submit a general plan. So I think just in that alone makes us focus on the mixed use. I don't know about the rest of you, but since the last meeting, I've been going through my head is how do you do something that is transparent, that is the way we've been doing things, which means you could go down a column and say, do you belong in that column as permittable, conditional permits, use, whatever. And the only thing that comes to mind for how I'm thinking about the projects that were in this first staff report was something many years ago we were looking at is, and I told Cindy about this, there's 2 different open space categories. One's more like where you could permit things that are in there, and the other one's like you have wander around on the grass and the bush, and you're out in what most people consider open space that spend some time out there. And they both have definitions, and they're both something you could follow. I'm beginning to fall in line on that with mixed use. I think we have 2 different mixed use. When we made the great push for the global warming solution way back when RENA just became the single most important thing to solve global warming, we set some trends in motion, one of which we will build housing over retail. Well, we're not doing that now. But what we do have is the location component of real estate. And the single most important location was priority development areas that our Council of Governments, ABAG, submitted for the last RENA cycle. We have to do this, and we're in the same spot as everybody else to make this thing work by the end of the year. So I'm thinking that what we have are 2 different mixed uses. A mixed use down at Country Club Village is not the same as a mixed use coterminous with or cotangent with Bishop Ranch Business Park. And now you know, because they've been entitled, that 4,900 units are going there. And I will look at the planning commissioners who've been doing this for a while. What is the value of 4,900 homes within walking distance of retail, which I prefer to call community serving? I don't know if that was Jim Blickenstaff's term or Ariel Strauss, but I'm going to steal it and start using it more and more because it's straight out of the transit-oriented community policies from MTC. And I think that's really what the planning commission is going to have to deal with. Is there going to be 2 mixed use? The one that is part of a priority development area, the direction of your Council of Governments and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, to make their plan work? And does it fit into what we're trying to do in the city? And that's why I'm adamant about keeping at least the core of the retail that is in the marketplace. Because when 4,500 homes come in, I don't want them having to drive to these other cities that we were calling leakage. It's that important. To me, it's part of the priority development area. And it is, whether it is or not, part of a specific plan in nature of, or in use, if nothing else. I'll wait to hear what others have to say.
Right. Commissioner Wallace, would you like to go?
Thank you. In 2006, the Economic Development Advisory Committee prepared an economic strategic plan for San Ramon. I was the chair of that committee at the time. Two of my members were Harry Sachs and Phil Alone, who then went to the Planning Commission and then went to the City Council. The major findings of that study were, first, the residents of San Ramon have a very high disposable income. The second was that San Ramon did not have a lot of the types of retail that the residents of San Ramon wanted to patronize to spend their high disposable income. And the third was, with our high disposable income in San Ramon, we could support between 1 million and 2 million square feet of new retail space. Now, if that sounds a little bit familiar, it's the same thing our consultants said in 2017 and 2022. So the issue's been there for over 15 years. We've known what the issue is, and the only thing we've done to resolve that in the past 15 years is City Center was built. The City Center was approved in 2007. So that's not exactly running the ball downfield. One thing I would note that in terms of further commercial space, that the City Walk development that we approved and that Mayor Hudson alluded to does call for 166,000 square feet of commercial space. Now, you may recall from the presentations we were given that this was designed to be flex space for the most part, which it could be commercial, it could be retail, but one thing it's not going to be is residential. Now, we've read the consultant's report, at least I have twice, once when it was presented to the joint meeting with the City Council and the Planning Commission, the second time before this meeting. And one thing that's really absent from that plan is a plan to actually build the retail, such as where are we going to build it? One thing that the consultants noted, as they did in 2006, was that our city has a paucity of space to create new non-residential development, which means that to get new residential development, with one exception, we really have to tear down something that already exists. The one exception is and always has been the Toyota plant. That's at least 30 acres of space. Part of it was zoned for high density housing, but the rest of it was considered destination retail. Now, one of the interesting things is that when we had the 2017 plan, and that came up in connection with the City Village proposal, and I asked the consultant, given what the North Camino Ramon specific plan proposes, which is basically mixed use from where BR 2600 is until all the way down to Crow Canyon Road, west of Camino Ramon, that whole area is basically mixed use, which is residential, non-residential. What did the consultant think of that plan to have some residential and commercial down there? And the consultant told us in no uncertain terms that mixed use was dead, that we should forget about it, that brick and mortar was dead, and that probably what we should do is make it all residential. And now the consultant has come back with a suggestion for what it calls mixed use villages. Well, when I saw that, the thing that occurred to me was he or she or it was talking about what we proposed in 2012 for North Camino Ramon specific plan. And the whole idea was that since City Center had been approved off of Bollinger, we knew that only high-end retail was going in there. And that if we were going to put 1,400 living units between BR 2600, the City Center, and Crow Canyon Road, that there's probably a good idea for having what the mayor called community serving businesses down there. We called it mixed use retail and services because it was never intended to be a competition for city center. It was intended to be services for the people who are living there. And if you look at the North Camino Ramon specific plan, what we looked at and planned for was housing generally around 1,200 square feet. It was going to be smaller 1 and 2 bedroom units for people who could live and work in Bishop Ranch or other places. Instead, what we've had, at least so far, as you know from City Village, is 2,000 square foot townhomes that sell for $1.5 million. So we've sort of gotten away from that. But the idea that city center mixed use villages are appropriate fits with the North Camino Ramon specific plan. There's also another area in town where we actually have that concept written into our specific plan. The San Ramon Village plan calls for the mixed use center of that development being at Deerwood and San Ramon Valley Boulevard. And there's a plan for several hundred units there. As you know, we actually approved an apartment building on the south side of Deerwood at the corner of San Ramon Valley Boulevard. And I know Commissioner Marks will remember that we had to twist arms to get any retail in that space. We had a proposal about 2 weeks ago for development at what is now the Morgan's Masonry that included about 160 units, all affordable housing. And the issue came up at that meeting that what type of commercial non-residential space was intended to go in there, because as a mixed use development area, it's supposed to have non-residential uses. And what we were told was, surprisingly not, that they did not consider commercial to be really viable in that area, which is why at this time their plan left open the corner of Deerwood and San Ramon Valley Boulevard as a proposed commercial development type to be decided later. And I bring both of these things up for this reason. Our experience, at least on the Planning Commission, has been on mixed use developments that the commercial side, the non-residential side, is treated as a poor stepchild at best. It is given short shrift, and the developers have attempted to minimize anything other than the residential. So when we talk about mixed use villages and having mixed use together, residential, non-residential, I think it's important that our experience has been, you should expect pushback from a developer to do that. And I think our city has waited long enough to push back, that we need to set up some rules that developers will understand, that are specific, and they meet the dread word objective about what's expected of a developer in a mixed use area. Now, one of the things we've talked about in terms of this meeting, as well as the last joint meeting we had, is preservation of existing retail centers, which was mentioned in our plan that we have in front of us. I went through and looked at the retail centers that exist in San Ramon. 6 of them are basically preserved from development because they are treated and zoned as community commercial, which means they are not appropriate for or will allow residential. That's the Plaza at Gale Ranch, where I live, Shops at Bishop Ranch, Gateway, Diablo Plaza, Canyon Lakes, and San Ramon Square. On the San Ramon Square, we had a large discussion at the Planning Commission about whether to make that a mixed-use development, beyond the idea that, as the mayor was talking about, we could have retail on the ground floor and some type of residential above it. But we decided to keep it retail, at least in that iteration of the plan. Now, there are 4 other shopping centers in San Ramon that also cannot be developed. That's because they are all zoned for commercial thoroughfare, which doesn't allow for residential. That'd be Twin Canyons, Bollinger Crossings, the San Ramon Courtyard, and Point West. Now, apart from the zoning being commercial thoroughfare, at least 3 of those shopping centers are next to Highway 680. And that sort of excludes them, or at least let's put it this way, that's a strong point in favor of not putting a residential there. So when we talk about preserving centers, retail centers, away from the problems of mixed use, we're really talking about 5 centers in San Ramon. Country Club, which the mayor mentioned, Crow Canyon Commons, the Marketplace, which comes up at every meeting, and the Norris Canyon Business Park. Our submission to HCD on the housing opportunity sites had housing opportunity sites at every one of those shopping centers except Crow Canyon Commons, which is the largest one of those shopping centers. So the question is, how do we preserve our retail and still allow for housing if we're going to keep the mixed use designation? Because having declared housing opportunity sites on these shopping centers under a mixed use rubric, I don't think that we really can change our mind and rezone them so no housing can go on them. So how do we deal with the issue of mixed use and meet our RENA numbers on the one hand and preserve our retail on the other? And this came up years ago at the other ad hoc committee we had when we talked about mixed use. And so far, the consultant has really not given us any firm things we can hang our hat on as to what to do. So I'm going to suggest one. I'm going to suggest something as a default for further discussions. If someone wants to change that, the consultant wants to come in and have different ideas that we should consider, then I think certainly we want to listen to it, consider it, discuss it, and make a decision. But I think the only way we're going to accomplish what we want to do, which is to preserve retail to the extent we can, as well as meeting our housing obligations, is to create in our land use designation and in our specific plans in the general plan, a definition of mixed use that has specific numerical constraints on what can be residential and what can be non-residential. I looked at this a number of years ago about the various ways that municipalities have defined mixed use in order to meet the goals of both retail and commercial. And you heard some of our current consultant talking about that at our joint meeting last week. So I think that we need to come up with a numerical number to work against to have an objective standard, or we're going to wind up with a mixed use development that consists of 40 townhomes with a vending machine in the lobby as our commercial development. So as a default, I would suggest using 25% of any project that has to be set aside for non-residential purposes. That's the minimum. It can go more than that, but the minimum has to be 25%. The second question is, what metric do you use as the 25%? And there's two different standards, at least, that you can use. One is to use the square footage of the proposed project and say 25% of that has to be set aside for non-residential purposes. The other way is to take the size of the project land to be used. For example, let's assume it's a 10 acres and say, okay, of that 10 acres, 25% of that, or 2.5 acres, has to be set aside for non-residential uses. That gives the developer a objective and clear-cut standard as to how to propose a project to us. And one of the things that I think we need to pay attention to in terms of how we define this is, what type of housing are we really looking to get to? We are never, ever going to meet our RENA numbers if we have 20 dwelling units per acre. It's not going to happen. So we have to look at ways to have more dense development, particularly in those areas that would support retail. For example, across Crow Canyon Road from Crow Canyon Commons, it is actually currently zoned as commercial mixed use. Residential is currently not allowed as part of the North Camino Ramon specific plan. Now we've named portions of that area as housing opportunity sites, which means we have to rezone them to allow for residential. Think about this for a second. If we had 3-story apartment buildings right across the street from Crow Canyon Commons, wouldn't that redound to the benefit of that retail establishment by having a significant retail base right across the street? Wouldn't it also help some of the businesses where Federal Express is, for example, the restaurant over there, not to mention the Costco gas station? But that's what we have to look at. I think we have to look at the consequences of not simply density, but how we divide up a piece of property between commercial and residential with an eye towards making the developer create non-residential space in a mixed-use area, and also allowing us to have the densities in those areas that we don't have to go out in other areas of the city to meet our RENA numbers, whether on the west side hills, or as some people suggested at our last meeting, rezoning portions of San Ramon that are currently single-family homes for higher density, 2 to 10 dwelling units per acre, which I think would be a tough way to do. The last thing two things I want to mention is this. First, although the consultant's report talks about attracting and retaining retail businesses in San Ramon, how we're going to do that, it really hasn't laid out in any substantive way. Maybe that'll come in the next reiteration of the plan that we can then look at that, but I think that has to be done. And the second is an issue that is really difficult to deal with, and that is, what is the impact of the pandemic? Is work from home going to continue? Does that mean that Bishop Ranch will remain a full occupied office park? Or does work from home part-time at least mean that companies will no longer need to have the office footprint that prior to the pandemic they used? You get mixed reports on it. Many of the businesses want to have people come back to the office because, quite frankly, it's very difficult to manage people if they're not around. And the best fertilization of ideas in a business comes around the water cooler or around a cup of coffee at a table. I think probably we're going to have a hybrid situation. And I think that Bishop Ranch realizes that, because if you look at what they proposed for the housing element, they're proposing to convert at least portions of the office space in Bishop Ranch to residential. Now, it may be that their idea of converting office space is sort of lowercase, because if you look at what happened at BR 2600, they're not tearing down any part of BR 2600. What they are doing is tearing up the parking lots, creating parking structures, and building residential units where those parking lots used to be. It is conceivable that they will also propose the same thing for certain of the office buildings in Bishop Ranch, because, as you know, there are many acres of asphalt out there with nothing on them but stripes for parking. So we don't know what it's going to look like, but I think that we have to assume that there are going to be pressures to have housing down in the urban core in Bishop Ranch, and we ought to develop policies which are clear and direct, that allow the development down there, but give us what we need, which is a tax base to go along with our population. The last thing we want to be is a large Piedmont. So those are my thoughts on this particular plan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving the history and the background for 2006. And kind of what we were looking at then. And I think that's what we're looking at now. Mayor, do you have your hand raised, or was it?
Yeah.
Okay, why don't you? go?
Yeah, and part of the problem with 2006, it was prior to all this global warming solution that went on, but the basics are there. And what Eric's heading towards in default, or whatever you want to call it, is pretty much what I'm kind of hearing from everybody is there's going to be priority areas. The difficulty is going to be in how to navigate a lot of the legislation. I don't want to lose any of the retail that we've been talking about. I've been focusing primarily on the marketplace because we know there are thousands of homes going right there. We know that there's going to be a new bridge. I mean, we've set up transit that's going to be serving, community serving in that particular area. And I think you have to start thinking that there are areas that are going to be different, similar to the open space, two different kinds. I think you have two different kinds of mixed use right now. And I'm stealing it from Rick when he said there's going to be certain primary areas where you might have a higher density. Well, Eric gave a perfect solution of where the legislation's going. You want to do 100% affordable housing, and you want it to be 3 stories or 20 homes, I think is what you said. But if you're going to talk about 3 stories, congratulations, you're doing 100% affordable housing by your choice. You get 4 incentives plus 3 extra stories. So it's all along what we were talking about when all this started, Eric, when we put you on that general plan commission, is all right, how do you get ahead of some of these crazy ideas? I think we're all pretty much saying the same thing. And at the same time, are we moving towards giving direction besides the mixed use on what will be a final general plan? And I'm setting Rick up with that because we got to send this thing in about 60 days. Rick, I'm out. You're on.
And you're mute, Rick.
Madam Chair, with your permission, I'm going to come back to what Eric said because I largely agree with it, though I have one sharp disagreement. But I want to ask a few requests for future information for this committee. On page 3 of the staff report, in the middle of the page, there are 3 general recommendations put forward by the consultant on how to repurpose underperforming shopping centers, but no specifics are given. I would ask that in hopefully the next report to us, that we are given some specific strategies under each of those 3 items that we could do and that might be being done in other cities. It is one thing to say incentivize people, but how, where, at what cost? I'd like to understand that better before I would recommend that. So that's a request for just flesh out that set of 3 statements. I would also like to ask that affected neighborhood shopping centers, when they are evaluated, those that are subject to being converted partially to housing, include the following information in the analysis. Certainly the general plan and zoning ordinance designations. I would like to see several FAR options with supporting graphics. I don't want to be given just one FAR and say that's the way we need to go. The staff may have a preferred FAR, and that makes sense for them to tell us about that. But I would like to see what else had been looked at from the standpoint of an FAR. I would like to know the total acreage of the site. I'd like to know the total constructed square footage on the site, not occupied, but constructed. And for each site in raw numbers and percent, I would like to know the remainder site acreage and square footage after the FAR that may be preferred by staff, how much of that remains. I have to say that one of the ways that I perhaps differ with Eric, and I don't believe that staff may not agree with me, but I think one of the ways to delineate the mix that we may allow is by acreage and not by anything that is as complicated as dealing with square footage as it changes. Importantly, I would like to talk about how we're going to go about looking at those shopping centers that are subject to being converted. I think there should be on a site-by-site analysis, and staff has alluded to this as a possible way to do this. Each site has its own different problems and opportunities. Its acreage is different. Its shape is different. I would like to have on a site-by-site basis, what are the standards that should apply to that particular shopping center? In other words, country clubs standards may not include some things or might be different than what we have at the marketplace or what we have anywhere else. But there are going to be some standards that will be generic to any shopping center conversion. And I would like the staff to consider the following. And if it's not possible to do some of these, I'd like to at least understand in a written statement why it is not. But I would start off with saying that I believe, and I see this all over, and I think it's one of the ways that we can work to preserve retail, is that new housing construction on the ground floor should be retail and commercial, or at least substantially so. I'm happy to go several floors above that for the housing. But a way to try and minimize the net loss to the city is to say meaningful space at the ground level that can serve the general public as well as the residents should be constructed. Secondly, I think we need to, and this is where we need to figure out how to incentivize a developer. I'd like to see structured parking. I would like to see structured parking, and I would like to see the construction of the housing on existing at-grade parking lots, as is going to happen in the Bishop Ranch on 2600. I'd like to know how that can work on each particular, I'm sorry, that's my dog reacting to another dog. How the construction can be set up in such a way that we minimize the need for parking, which only eats up space. We're all aware of that these days, but how the parking lots can be used much more efficiently and can support what may be a key to, again, preserving the retail. I'd like to see that there are pedestrian connections between the new housing when it goes in and the remaining retail that stays on the property. One of the ways to create gathering spaces and a sense of being at an interesting place is that you don't have to walk through parking lots to get from one thing to another. You want to encourage safe on-site pedestrian circulation. You want there to be benches and landscaping and amenities that connect them. I'd like to see a policy that addresses that. And lastly, at this time, I'd like to see, we all talk about shared parking. I can tell you, having done shared parking before, it's not that difficult to create a shared parking area with an office building because the peak hours are different. But to create a shared parking situation with existing retail when you have overlapping peak hours is different. I would like to know, if we're going to go the route of shared parking, how that would be monitored and enforced over time, particularly on evenings and weekends and holidays when the people who live in the units are there and you get larger crowds at the restaurants or the retail areas. So I'd like to request that the staff take a look at those things and any others, but again, start with the site specific and then move into that which is generic. With regard to what Commissioner Wallace indicated, I do agree with most of his analysis, but I will tell you this, and again, our staff here may have a different experience, but if you establish something as low as 25% of the center can be or must be retail, that's what you're going to get. That's what the people will build to. They will take advantage of everything else because housing markets right now are, and in the future, are probably the more desirable location or the more desirable land use, I should say. I think that bar is too low. My own view is that it should be much closer to something like 70-30 or 60-40 with retail being the predominant use on the property and housing being a supporting use. But I do believe that we need to be very careful about setting the bar that low. Every time I have ever tried something like that, where we give people a range, the market chooses to go to where they think the market is at that point, where the maximum return on investment is, and that tends to change the land use that you were hoping to get. I'd like to say that in general, I know that we have or will have by now submitted the housing element to the state for review, and that issue is probably closed, but I do believe that there is an inconsistency in taking existing neighborhood centers, and I'm not talking about the retail that's across the street from Crow Canyon Commons. I'm working to preserve neighborhood shopping centers. This report says that we could get as much as 1.1 to 1.8 million square feet of retail demand over the course of the next period of time. But that land is the issue. We do not have sufficient land. So when we come up with however we're going to deal with these shopping centers that are subject to being converted, it just doesn't make sense to me to minimize what we're looking for in terms of retail and maximize as much as possible housing. It just seems to me that there is a quality of life issue for residents that is not being addressed so far in what we've done. There are 90,000 people who live in town, and what we've done so far is reduce housing opportunity or shopping opportunities. We have roughly 20 to 25,000 more people coming, maybe more than that. They too will need to have places to shop and don't want to drive long distances, and we don't want them to. Taking the land inventory that today comprises the neighborhood shopping centers and reducing it drastically, to me, misses the opportunity to provide those opportunities for people and to provide the sales tax producing land that we need as a government to provide the services to people that they also expect. And so I will be looking to see how can we minimize the impact of housing on the retail shopping centers and do it in a way that requires ground floor retail for a potential project. One of the things we're going to hear in the future is it just doesn't pencil. It just doesn't work. Our job is not to respond to the current market. Our job is to play the long game. Our job is to look to the future and say, yeah, it may not be the market today, but it might be the market in the future. And we know that we have all these people coming. We have to play the long game, the 10 years out game, the 15 years out game. It used to be general plans were a 25-year horizon. We need to say that we have to have a vision of what the city is in the future and does it work? And if it doesn't work, we certainly don't want the reason it doesn't work to be able to be traced back to decisions that we are making in this general plan update. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. I will make my comments because I haven't
Or you
talked
won't get a
about it,
word
and
in
then I
edgewise
will
if you don't.
give you the mic, Mayor. So what I want to start off by saying is that Rome was not built in a day. I think all the comments and the feedback we've gotten so far is relevant to everything we've seen, and this is something we'll have to take one by one. I like the recommendations from and the policy and the strategic recommendations, starting off with number one, right? Incentivize and reinvest in existing retail. I truly think that is a very important point, because as I go through San Ramon, as I see our shopping centers, they were developed with a mindset of what city development looked like years ago. And we truly have an opportunity to take our existing shopping centers, layer it with, more deeper information like everybody requested. But if that can be one of our North Stars, and that can be a policy recommendation, and then we'd probably have multiple meetings just around that first point, that how do we incentivize and how do we basically keep the existing footprint, but then redevelop it? And how do we support that? I remember before the pandemic, at one of the mayor's conferences, we had somebody present to us about what Walnut Creek looked like maybe 20, 30 years ago, which is now their downtown, where they have the Tiffany's, the Crate and Barrel. That was basically a rundown car shop and some beat up gas station and things like that, and how that area was completely reimagined and redeveloped to become the walking kind of downtown that Walnut Creek is now. So there are tools out there. There are things that we can certainly tap into, but if we make this as a policy, then this is where we all agree that this is what we want to do, that incentivize and reinvest our existing footprint. I've seen some amazing examples in Irvine. I was sharing with actually the city manager yesterday, what they're calling are the anti-malls. And they've taken the existing footprint and the existing retail, and develop them into these really cool gathering places with different kinds of retail, you know, from you know, basically they've got retail in there, they've got food, beverages, all sorts of mix, and they've got art and a place where people like to go. And this is a complete redevelopment of what used to be their existing old strip malls, if you will. So we have that opportunity. I think if we can take that point and make it a priority for us, or, you know, part of the policy, I don't think we'll be able to execute on all of this. But if we say that this is a point we agree with and we want to go down this path and get further detail into it, what is that going to look like? What would the recommendations? I think it's going to take a whole meeting to discuss this and perhaps go back to the policy. The next one is investing in recruitment and marketing campaign. Again, that's a very important point. We all know the stats, a lot of things that Commissioner Wallace shared with us. How do we go and market our city? How do we tell people, you know, and we have a blueprint with what Bishop Ranch has already done, right? How were they able to attract some of the businesses which are nowhere else in Contra Costa, within hundreds of miles of where we are? And so how do we market our city as well? How do we put out those stats that we are a 85,000 or 90,000, whatever the right number is, city, that we have this disposable income, that we are ready to spend that and we are ready to pay that for that. So that's a very important thing, that not only we know that information, but we go out and market and campaign that, and go out to whatever, I don't know, conferences and things where you go and talk about your cities and bring in the right businesses here. We were talking about a business, I know the mayor knows about it, but a very popular chicken place. And when you talk to your teenage kids, they will be like, can you really bring that to San Ramon? Because they're surprised, right? But it's a matter of marketing to that specific chicken store and telling them, look, we have an under 18 population that, that comes from an affluent neighborhood that is ready to spend the money. How can we help you bring your business to San Ramon? And then the third one is, I love the concept of villages. Again, I think Commissioner Marks mentioned this too, but gathering spaces, right? And that's truly what the city center has become. It has changed how we live in San Ramon. I moved to San Ramon in 2006. My kids were climbing Safeway up in that village, that plaza down in, the Safeway Plaza, because they didn't have anywhere to go, nowhere to hang out. Now you see families hanging out, gathering there. A friend of mine made a very interesting comment. She said, I like that everybody seems happy here. They're out there. And those are the sort of gathering places and the villages. And if we look at the concept of a village, right? A village will have everything that that community needs within it. And so if we again make that our North Star, we can add details. We can really truly say, okay, this is what a village looks like. Get the right consultants, get the right people to advise us to what to do. But I like the recommendations in that if we set these as, this is the path we want to go down, this is what we want to do in the future. And then we really start investing in each one of them, because like I said, Rome wasn't built in a day. And if we are not focused and go down a certain path, we're never going to be able to get things done. So like Commissioner Wallace, you said, this was proposed in 2006. We were talking about the same thing. Now it's like, how do we say, okay, these three things become the identity of San Ramon as a retail space, and then we just go down and execute it on it. So I would love to see, even if we don't boil the ocean here, I would love to see that we all agree that these are good points to align behind, and then we get recommendations, we get more details on how we do this and set policies around it. I think the conversation we're having around retail today came about because we said we need to put the word retail in our priorities as a council. And that kind of drove the conversation to where we are very thoughtfully now talking about, what retail is going to look like. So those were my comments. I know the mayor really wants to make his comments. His hand has been raised. for a while now, so please go ahead.
I thought Rome was built it. No, I want to keep coming back because I think our planning commissioners are onto it. It's just maybe you've been beaten down too many times by people coming in and telling you different things. But I want to focus on three things that Rick was saying. One is that focus on the acreage or this, and I kind of lean towards where you were really going was FAR, and that's really going to come through the transit-oriented community policies to favor what you're saying or the direction you're talking about. But two key terms I want to get with, and if I'm not on the same mind with you, please say so. Site specific. You can't teach location. If you've got it, you've got it. When I say community serving, it isn't just retail for sales tax. It's things people visit daily. The grocery store. The other thing you said is people will tell you it doesn't pencil out. Not my problem. When you spend 10, 15 years letting your property go downhill so that you can make more money with a different use, I'm not going to go overboard to help you out. If it's only worth $2.85 a square foot to rent it, because I remember when I was working there, it was over $4. Then you've really messed up. I can't believe, if you said that you could only do $2.85 a square foot, fine, pencil out what the return on the investment is and tell me what the property's worth at that point. Because I'll bet you could have 5 buyers within 24 hours. They're not charging $2.85 a square foot. They're not maintaining the property because they make more money in housing. And I'm going to be very blunt about it. I'm not going to bend over to do it for them to make more money. That is the key site on all the development that we have just approved. If 4,900 homes are going in there before Chevron, we don't even know what's going to happen there yet. Then we can't afford to give this site away. Now, maybe I told you before I'd trade off where the Residence Inn is because I know we're going to have a monumental problem when extremely low income is in future arenas, but that's about it. I don't want to surround that property with housing, and I don't think we have to. I'll leave it up to you, Rick.
Can I respond, Madam Mayor or Madam Vice Mayor?
Of course.
You asked if I was on the same page as you, Dave. Yes, I said that I think there need to be site-specific policies for each property as well as generic. And it doesn't pencil out. My point was that's not my problem too. I play the long game, and it may not, markets come and go, and they generally have a 3 to 5 year cycle. We're going to be around a whole lot longer than any market. And our needs, I think, are going to be predictable relative to retailing and commercial uses. And so I don't find that an argument that moves me a whole lot when somebody says it doesn't pencil out. I would just wait. So far, you and I are on the same page.
It's that darn Eric. Oh, is my mute off?
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? Anything? Have we had a good discussion given staff direction where we want to go?
Yes, so I'll jump in, and I've been taking notes this afternoon to make sure that when we do come back to this committee that we're going to be touching on some of these ideas that have been provided today. Some of the things that I heard, we started off with community serving and the need to tailor policies dependent on location and setting, and recognizing that there are different policies that make sense for certain types of neighborhoods and denser neighborhoods than there are other parts of the city where the surrounding and the setting have perhaps a different need for different sets of policies. Where we also support the concept of pedestrian accessible and reimagining parking areas. that there's opportunities there with the surface parking, that there's some flexibilities that the city would support depending on the setting again, but that there's opportunities with surface parking and shared parking to be able to provide additional retail spaces. There was also some suggestions about percentages or acreage or floor area ratio minimums that we'll want to consider for mixed use centers. And potentially those might be varying percentages depending again on location and setting, but also the type of redevelopment that would occur, that there may be some incentives for development standards, depending on how much retail is going to be provided as part of a redevelopment. So in that there was just general consensus that the suggestions that were being made in the retail analysis is how we want to tailor our policies. And you'd like to see some specific examples of how we would be able to take those recommendations and put them into policies in the general plan update. So I think that in general, that those are the things that I've heard, and it gives us enough for us to put some policies for you for our next meeting.
Mayor Hudson.
Yeah, I don't want to add any more to it. That's enough on the plate, but I wanted to put something out there for thought. I haven't been able to work it out. Unfortunately, timing never works for these meetings with other meetings. But in redevelopment, we had overlay districts. Is that something that might work here, especially if you're close to a PDA? I don't need an answer now, just something to consider if it hasn't been considered. Because I'm locking on to this term, Rick, specific sites. I mean, it just doesn't seem to make sense when you're talking zoning, because you have all this, well, you constraint of trade, but the reality is, once you're built out a little bit more and you're having to deal with the changes that we're having to deal with right now, how else do you deal with it other than specific sites? So I don't know if that works in here in the thinking, or if it's something that's a tool we can use, but if while you're putting all this together, something pops in that, hey, yeah, that makes some sense there, then do it. I haven't been able to pull up all the old redevelopment stuff to remember why we were doing it. I think even in the commercial service area, whatever, community commercial, the travelers that got off that you were talking about, Rick. Can't remember the names of these things anymore. I'm really getting older, I guess, but I think we're getting closer. And you think we need another meeting? Is that it, Sabina? Or can we do it now? Or you want to let her suffer trying to get all the cats together?
I mean, what does the committee want to do? Do we, now that we've given direction, I think we all agree that we need specifics around it, but do we need Cindy to bring those specifics back to us, or back to a joint meeting, or just back to the planning commission? I'm open for recommendations on however we want to do this, because we also have a limited time now, right? How's our time? How's the clock ticking, Cindy? In terms of submitting?
The clock is pretty loud right now. We are just wrapping up our housing element package together for the state. That moves forward just as we've seen it over during the public review period. So we don't anticipate changes related to that until HCD provides us comments back in the next couple of months. But because we have to rezone and also do concurrent adoption, in order to make sure that there's a no net loss, that we're not meeting that, creating another issue with no net loss. We need to make some decisions pretty quickly about what these policies are going to look like on the mixed use zones. That way, because there's an environmental review that has to be done with those proposed standards, we have to also be able to prepare the environmental document along with the standards that we're creating.
I would prefer you get it in front of PC as soon as possible, Rick, Eric, so you guys can explain where we are. I mean, if we don't have buy-in from the planning commission, we're just going on down the road. I mean, that's my personal opinion. We've given them enough to this point. Maybe bring up the points that you brought up, Eric, Rick, the points that you make, and see how they feel. Because eventually it's going to have to be in front of the planning. Unless, Sabina, you don't feel if we're far enough down the road. I thought we have done enough.
I think, yeah,
Get
we've
it.
given enough, direction here. But I mean, right now, one of the things, right, you've heard all the concerns that our existing retail centers, and the reason we had this subcommittee as well, we just want to make sure that we are preserving our existing retail centers in whatever way possible, and not putting them at risk based on what we're submitting. So that's probably going to be the most urgent and important need for, I think, the commission and the council, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was one of the reasons that we did come to the subcommittee as well. So as
I
long
would
as
like
we're
to,
keeping that balance.
I
Go ahead.
would like to take the position that we do need to talk about it more as a committee. The
Okay.
definitions, policies, and incentives that are going to shape the shopping centers we've put out requests and things that we would like to see, but it's the language that comes back. It's the percentage of the shopping center, in however you measure it, that preserves retail, that matters. Incentives, I agree. I want to try and incentivize people to create the kind of spaces that Vice Mayor Zafar has talked about, but how do you do that? How do you know what you're getting into?
Yeah.
You can bring it directly to the planning commission, but what if the commission says we disagree? It's going to get kicked back to the staff again. So my feeling is this is, at least for residents in the city, the most important part of the general plan update. And to have one meeting on it at the subcommittee level, and I think the commission and the council are going to pretty much follow our lead if we reflect what they've said in the past. It's just hard for me to imagine one meeting would be sufficient.
Well, let me put it this way, and maybe it'll help. Your next meeting is usually the first Tuesday, but I think that's the 4th of July, so it isn't. Is anybody available before the planning commission meeting to have a meeting?
So I think we
have a
can,
meeting
do we
on
have to
July
have
5th.
it before the planning commission meeting? Sorry.
I'm going to chime in. I think, with the 2 weeks, the turnaround, the information that's been requested is going to take more than 2 weeks to put together. So we're going to need the time to kind of go back and, determine the amount of time and how to put the information together. And so if we did it in 2 weeks, it wouldn't be the quality that we want to present back to the ad hoc committee. So the planning commission meeting, the next one is July 19th. So I'm thinking maybe they meet after the Wednesday month, after the July 19th meeting, Cindy, probably the week after. And I'll give some time to work with Roger and the consultant team.
Don't we have a meeting on July 5th?
You do,
Okay.
but I'm just, the 5th one, that's next week.
Are you saying we are going to have the meeting on July 5th then?
So
No,
I
after the July 19th meeting, because we
So
meet.
this can continue in parallel, Debbie, can't it? Where, so this committee can continue in parallel till we get to a point where we can report back to the commission and the council that we
Correct.
have a comprehensive, plan to present, a policy to present in front of them while the process continues, that is continuing with the planning commission. Because again, we don't want to rush this either. But we want to make sure that we we also are, because I think, from what I've heard from the council, they are looking to us to bring something back to them, which they can agree on. And if we rush it, we're not going to get to it either. So we can continue the process in parallel,
Yes.
decide, where we want to go with this.
Yeah, and the commission on July 19th will have the retail presentation, the retail analysis presentation. And so that'll give them more insight into the bounds of the commission. So we'll probably get some additional feedback from those members too, that will help us shape the work that we bring back to the ad hoc committee also.
Sounds good to me. All right. So then we meet again with more information that'll come out of the July 19th comments and feedback.
I probably would target the last week of July at this point. It is kind of where I was expecting after the feedback we get on the 19th and the feedback from this afternoon, to give us enough time to put those standards together. We'll probably be able to get back to the committee the last week of July.
Sounds good.
So you're talking about around the city council meeting, then, not the planning commission meeting?
So probably closer to the 27th, 28th.
Okay.
Perhaps one of those dates, and we can check availability for that, but it's obviously not going to be on city council evening and not on Friday, and probably not on Monday. So
Whatever it takes.
well,
If we have to put
one of-
those darn
one or the
council
other.
members off, so be it.
Yeah.
So maybe why don't we tentatively say, Cindy, we'll look at the 27th.
Is
So
that a Wednesday?
the Wednesday, yeah. It's not a formal date. We'll do the notice and post it on the website, but just if you guys can just let us know if that's going to work for you, that would be great. And then we'll work through the next steps.
Yeah, Wednesday at 5 is generally good for me. I don't think we have other council meetings. I don't know, the mayor has a lot more meetings than I do.
Mayor's, whatever, we'll find it. They don't have to worry, but they just call Karen with me. I mean, I don't even, I was looking for my phone when you said that, but whatever it takes. We're not going to do this thing where, oh darn, we've got all of 4 minutes to make a decision. There's some very different possibilities that have come up, and I think we hash it out till we show that Eric was right. Just want to see if Rick's listening.
Yeah, 15 years later, I don't want to say, remember we talked about it in that ad hoc committee?
Yeah.
taking
whatever.
notes.
Anyway, I think it's moving along. I'm not hearing tremendously no one way or the other. It's, we're hearing where there are some concerns. If you pick a number, they're going to, I think what I'm hearing from you, Rick, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you go, you can build 20 to 30 homes in this range. They're not coming in at 20, they're coming in at 30. So likewise, if you do the 25%, I mean, and then we run into the same problem that we had to deal with last night. Wait a minute, it's Wednesday, yeah. Where they couldn't put senior housing in there, but I mean, we've been able to deal with it. So we've got to come up with a policy that somebody can follow that isn't on a planning commission or a city council. And I think we could do it in another meeting.
When you deal with density, it's not just a question of the numeric side of it. It's where do you place it on the site? And the marketplace, the first building we saw was 550 feet long, 5 stories tall, right in front, across the street from residential. You don't do that. You find a location on the site that works for everybody, where it's close as possible. So it's density and location on the site.
I think if you've got all the feedback, item number 3, adjournment. This meeting is adjourned at 6:35 p.m. on a Wednesday night, June 29th, 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice 4th of July, people.